Okay, thank you. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Larisa Dinsmoor, and I'm an attorney with the Public Defender's Office here in Orange County. I wanted to briefly talk about getting the most out of Article 18 and mental health assessments. I have done a number of them. I have ordered a number of them, and I think that they are incredibly valuable. So, the law in China, as I have been informed, is based out of Article 18, the capacity for criminal responsibility of special groups. And when you break that down, as you probably all know, that it requires essentially 3 elements. 1, you need a mentally ill person. 2, that causes a harmful outcome. And 3, that's unable to appreciate or control their conduct. I'm going to focus mainly on mentally ill person and unable to appreciate their control or conduct, because the harmful outcome is obviously the crime that they committed. So, what are signs of mental illness? Sometimes they can be really hard to determine because people have been living with mental illness for so long that they've become used to adapting in any society and figuring out how they need to maneuver to be accepted and function in society. And sometimes, it's so obtuse that you can tell right away once you meet someone whether or not they're suffering from a mental illness. So there's a broad spectrum between, someone being able to hide their mental illness and someone who is not so able to hide their mental illness. So what kind of factors do we look at when we have a client who we believe is suffering from mental illness? One, the easiest one, is physical appearance. I'll go into that a little bit later. The second one is their demeanor or outward behavior. What is it that they are thinking or doing that is indicative of a mental illness? Third, their thought process. What is their thinking, reasoning, and remembering like? In other words, are they able to respond to you in a way that is consistent with the question you asked or with the issue that you're discussing? Fourth is thought contact, which I'll go into more, and perceptual, and what the easiest one is perceptual disturbances. So going forward and looking more in depth into clients' physical appearance. What kind of things are we looking for? Now, this is not an exclusive list. I'm sure there's tons of other issues that would trigger a lawyer to know that something is wrong mentally with their client. But a physical appearance, you might see poor hygiene or grooming. Sometimes a lot of my clients who are mentally ill, unfortunately, end up homeless. And so wearing old clothes or tattered clothes or dirty clothes is very common. I've seen people also carrying a lot of bags around. They carry their clothing with them because they're homeless, because they have a mental illness. They likely became homeless, and therefore looking at, kind of they're moving all the time, and they keep their clothes all together in a suitcase or a bag. And that's consistent with wearing the same clothing every day. Sometimes obviously, if you're mentally ill, sometimes it's hard just to do the basic things of thinking about hygiene, thinking about taking care of your physical outward appearance. And we see that, or I've seen that in mentally ill clients. Another one is looking older than their actual age. I think from my experience, people with mental illness end up homeless a lot or engaging in other unhealthy behaviors like drugs or alcohol. And that use of substances to try and self-medicate, to try and make them feel better, feel, quote, normal, often causes a physical reaction, a physical aging of the person. In my experience, I've seen that a lot. We have a homeless court here in Orange County, and that actually specifically is geared towards homeless people. And I worked in that area for over 2 years. And I can say, based upon my personal experience, I saw there was a very strong linkage between people being homeless and having mental illness. And again, the question becomes, did someone become mentally ill and then become homeless? Or were they homeless and then become mentally ill? It all kind of depends on the given individual and their experience. And finally, I've noticed that many of my clients' appearances when it comes to mental illness appear fatigued or anxious. Because of their mental illness, they are constantly on guard and are sometimes defensive as well. And because the way they're viewing reality is so different than how you or I view reality. Now, the next area to look at, or to potentially find to determine whether your client is mentally ill or not, and what mental illness they're battling, is their demeanor or body language. They have sometimes you can group the demeanor and body language into one of these categories. Are they skeptical? Who are you? You're not here to help me as a lawyer, I've heard. You're a prosecutor. I've also heard that a lot. You are just you're paid by the government. You are part of the government. You don't. Yeah, you're against me. That has been unfortunately a common theme that I've experienced over my over 16 years of experience as a public defender here. Another characteristic or form of body language that I've encountered a lot is a fight or flight kind of issue. And a lot of this stems from mental illness and living in a different world than everyone else is living in. I've had a lot of clients who come across as if they are high on drugs and become very aggressive in talking to me. Also in their physical gestures. I've had clients get in my face, and part of it is the mental illness. It is not knowing and being skeptical of who you are. So that brings up the notion of trust and building trust as the attorney. And I know that that's often sometimes really hard to do for me with my average client. It's even exponentially harder with my mentally ill clients because their brain is functioning differently, their reality is different than the reality that I'm experiencing, and sometimes what's coming out of their mouth, how they're communicating, is in contrast with what the reality is. So I try and put myself in their shoes and respond appropriately. And in a case where if someone is in a fight or flight, for example, fight mode, I've had clients, as I said, get very aggressive and get into my face, learning how to not deflect, but actually just bring down the tension, calm my client down by using a different tone of voice, maybe not using a authoritative tone of voice as a lawyer, but I switch to kind of my social worker side. And I feel like in our line of work, we always are balancing that area between being a lawyer and being a social worker, if we're doing it right, because there are so many social issues that our clients come to us with. Moving along, the defensive client, the defensive body language. I don't believe you. I've heard many times, you work for the prosecutor, you're not on my side, you don't care about me, you don't know anything. I don't take any of this seriously, but I do work to kind of utilize what I'm hearing to try and figure out how can I best connect with my client, because each client is different. There are some clients who are very antisocial. That adds a whole different level, that they just won't communicate, won't just shut down, especially when you get to talking maybe about the facts of the case, or especially about their childhood. There's people, my clients have been very untrusting, because when many times in their background, in their childhood, they have trusted someone else, an adult, maybe a parent, maybe an uncle or aunt, and that person has let them down in some way. And my clients have experienced a lot of sexual abuse and physical abuse from family members. And so there is often a lot of untrust with other people in general. Also, a lot of my clients have been, to be honest, treated unfairly in my criminal justice system. And so they don't trust the lawyers, they don't trust the system. And it's a very added level of challenge to get my clients, to trust me. Many of them are also reclusive. They don't want to talk. And I really need to get my clients to talk so they can tell me not only what happened on the date of the crime, the allegations, to work me through all the specifics, because as we know as lawyers, often the devil is in the details, as they say. So not just getting an overall idea of what happened with the allegations of the crime they committed, but the very specific details, especially to determine whether or not at that time of the allegation, of the alleged offense that they committed, were they experiencing signs of mental illness that we can identify, we can point to show that they are not culpable of some or all of the alleged offense because they were experiencing mental illness issue at the time. The last demeanor body language one that I look at is reclusive, and that just means a bit more withdrawn. And I think that ties into all 6 of these. Every client that I've seen has either one or more of these body languages or these demeanors that I have seen throughout the context of my engagement with them. And again, like, knowing which one they are helps me start to identify what type of issues, mental health issues, they're experiencing and how I can communicate with them best as their lawyer to help them through the criminal process. Moving forward, so now this is where I kind of get a little bit more in depth with those 5 areas. What is thought process? Thought process is thinking, reasoning, and remembering. But basically, the question becomes, can you have a coherent conversation with your client in which they present responsive answers? For example, if I would ask the client, so what happened on this day of the incident? Were you, what do you remember? And some clients will respond tangentially and, well, I wasn't there, and start out as if their answers are responsive. I wasn't there. I was out with my grandmother and we were having ice cream, and then we were robbed by these 2 people, and then they took us. I didn't have any money, and then I was had to go to this place and at this place, then there was this other person who robbed me again. And so that might be an example that I'll hear. And at first, I'm listening, obviously, I'm looking at their body language, and I think, okay, they've been robbed. This is an issue, this is real. But then as I listen to them and they keep going on, and they're robbed again, and maybe they're robbed again, and it's not making much sense to me. And so what I like to do is I try and balance between being a lawyer and being very respectful of my clients. I don't want to cut them off. I don't want to say anything or do anything that will make them feel disrespected so that they will shut down and stop talking to me. But it is that fine line, right, of being able to talk to your client and get them to give you the information that they need to give you, and keeping them kind of on track. And and it's those fine lines and details where you find out when they are lucid enough to give you facts that you can go off of that will assist in your defense. And then there are times where the facts that they're representing don't make sense. But I always try and keep copious notes, because in these conversations that I'm having with my clients, there's so much information coming at me that I want to make sure I memorialize it, so that later on down the line, when I'm thinking about a defense, when I'm thinking about a mental health evaluation, when I'm thinking about, how do I communicate and connect with this client again at a later time? What's the best way to do it? Is it by circling back and reiterating a lot of things? Is it by acknowledging them and what they're saying to me, by saying again what they just said to me? For example, Mr. Smith, yes, so what you're saying is that when you were in the park the other day, you saw people who had yellow hair and were running around and screaming, and they were the ones who came over and took your bag. Is that what you're telling me? And when I use that kind of tactic or that kind of communication skill, I do two things. One, I allow that my client to feel heard. Yes, that's what they said, or no, that's not what that's what I said, or no, that's not what I didn't say. This is what I meant. And then I'm also kind of trying to direct them in the right area where I need to get the conversation to go, to get the information that I need from my client to help them. So the second kind of area that we look at with trying to connect and view whether or not our clients have mental illness is their thought content. And it's basically, are they able to comprehend what you're saying? And as I addressed just recently in the thinking process, are they able to respond in accordance and consistent with the question that you're asking? Second, can you understand your client and have a coherent conversation with him or her? Or is your client using, quote, word salad, which is also known as having overvalued ideas, preoccupations, and obsessions? Like a perfect example of word salad is, I've had clients seem like they're engaged with me, but then they'll go off and, the other day my mother and I didn't see that, and but where's my money? And then I took out the trash, but beside the house, the doors are unlocked, and so switching topics, complete topics, very rapidly, or not so rapidly, but in a way that it's hard to follow the logic. In fact, there isn't any logic, because at that time, my clients are experiencing some mental health issue, be it a hallucination or a preoccupation, or they're obsessing with something else in their mind. And you can see that a lot of the times I've experienced clients who have one thing that they completely obsess about, and they talk about it over and over, and it's this kind of vicious cycle. And so trying to stop them, not necessarily from having the delusion, the mental illness, but kind of helping them circle back to our conversation that we're having, so that I can help them with their legal matter. Oftentimes what I'll do if they're obsessing and they're talking about this other thing is I will buy in to what they're saying and say, for example, Mr. Smith, yes, I believe you. This thing is going on over there, but just for 5 minutes, can we please focus on this? I'm here to help you. I understand that someone is trying to take your very expensive car right now, but I promise you that's not going to happen while I'm talking to you, because I'm here to help you. Can we please, talk about what happened on the day of the offense or whatever? But so trying to get my clients to just kind of calm down, try and trust me and open up, even if it's just in very scattered moments here and there, circling them back to the conversation, circling them back to the incident, circling them back to get the information that I need as a lawyer to help them. So perceptual disturbances are the obvious things that we see in our clients that give us the heads up that they are likely to have either a mental illness or are on some kind of substance that is altering their thought process. I think one of the biggest things that I'm experiencing here in California is a lot of mental illness, and there's a lot of drug use. And the question is always, was someone mentally ill and then use drugs to cope with the mental illness, use drugs to self-medicate, and then they got a mental illness because of the drug use? Or did they, or do they have an organic mental illness first, and then the drug use, were they completely fine and then they used drugs and then they got a mental illness? And I think the only way I can figure out that is by talking to my clients in and doing a life interview, which is basically an interview of their entire life and bringing them back to the beginning as a childhood and talking to them about kind of their story, getting their story from childhood to the present. So I get an idea of family members, do they have family members that were mentally ill? Was there mental illness in the family, etc.? And those help me kind of figure out whether or not the mental illness came first or the drug use came first. The reason being why that's important to me is that if it's the drug use that has triggered it, I would focus on trying to get that client help with substance abuse first, to address the mental health issues, so that I could then help them get through the criminal process. So that's just been kind of one of my experiences. So perceptual disturbances, if I haven't said so already, are the outward things that we see that literally disturb our client's brain because they are completely fixated on it. They're the delusions, they're the overvalued ideas. I am a doctor. I am the best doctor in the city. I have treated many patients. Things that when they say are totally inconsistent with how they're presenting physically. A client that you know who can't, who carries their bag of clothing around with them and are very dirty and disheveled. Clearly, they're not a doctor, a practicing doctor at the time. But that overvalued idea might give you a hint of how to talk to them and how to get them through the legal process. The preoccupations and the obsessions are, also very easy to kind of pick up on. Our clients are basically seeing another world, and they're reacting to that world, not to the world that we're living in. So the ultimate challenge is for us to try and figure out how do we get into their world to bring us to our world to help them through the legal process, or how do we get to their world? Very challenging. I bet you all thought, I'm becoming a lawyer, I don't need to be a doctor. And then all of a sudden, so much of our job that we do in taking care of our clients is identifying a lot of issues that doctors deal with. So here's the crux of the matter. What role did the mental illness or condition play in the commission of the crime? So it's not enough to know my client has a mental illness. According to Article 18, it's important to know at the time that they were committing the crime, were they exhibiting signs of mental illness? Were they experiencing a quote episode? Were they delusional? What factors can you point to in the law? What factors can you point to in your client that you can relate to the law to show that your client was mentally ill during the commission of the crime? What I like to do is, even before the crime, like time leading up to the crime, days before, weeks before, how was my client acting? How was he acting to family, to friends, even to witnesses in the police report that that know my client? I want to talk to them and find out what they witnessed. Was my client acting erratically? Was he lucid? Was he, could you have a conversation with him or not? Was he walking around half naked with a garbage bag? These are things I would want to gather explicit details so that I could start to paint the picture, if the facts were there, that my client kind of pre-crime, you see this aggravation, this elevation of mental illness coming and growing in time. I think for me, it helps. That is kind of the cycle of mental illness, that it can change. It can start out low or small, however you would title it, and then it becomes more pronounced. And in that in that moment of time when it's pronounced, that's typically when my clients are committing some form of a crime, because they're responding to a non-reality. They're responding to something in their head, not to what they're seeing. And that leads us to, during the crime, what symptoms are they exhibiting that are indicative of mental illness? Well, since I wasn't there on the day of the crime, what I look to is the police reports, the interviews of witnesses, of victims, and I look at my client's statements. In those interviews with victims and witnesses, I find a lot of great material, things that especially the police officers would note. Sometimes your civilian witness, your average witness, the person next door who's experiencing or watching this happen, gives a lot better information than police reports, because in my opinion, police have a specific agenda to find your client guilty. They are trained a certain way. In my opinion, it's a very linear way. Their sole purpose is to find the quote guilty person and arrest them and put them in jail. The police officers are not social workers, they're not psychologists. They are there for safety and protection of the overall public, not for any strike that. So police reports are just the tip of the iceberg for me. What I like to do is interview the witnesses, even the witnesses in the police reports, because I'm going to ask different questions. I'm going to ask questions that the police officers didn't ask or maybe write down. Little nuances about my client, how he was acting, what he looked like, what his mannerisms were, what was his voice intonation. Was he talking really fast? Was he talking really slow? Was he slurring his words? Those are the kind of questions that I want to know in order to help me with my defense of my client. Also, did my client make any statements? And then compare that from the interviews that I'm getting from witnesses with what the police report said. And that kind of gives me a bigger picture of the event, the incident, and I can approach it accordingly. I also want to know whether or not people are exhibiting symptoms after the crime. That's why I go, the first visitation is super important, because I want to go as soon as possible, because that's kind of taking a snapshot, a picture of my client's mental state nearest to the crime. I had a very serious crime client who I defended. I'll call him Ivan. Ivan was charged with murder of a random stranger in his apartment complex. Now, Ivan was a very smart person. He was actually a PhD. He had a PhD in I forget what area. He had a family, a wife, and a set of twins and a third child. And when I was assigned to the case. I knew that I needed to get into the jail as soon as possible, because when I read the police reports, there was evidence or talk about Ivan making statements about aliens and trying to, aliens were invading and they were going to hurt his family. And so that was kind of the hint to me that, okay, there's some mental illness there. So I wanted to get in to visit him as soon as possible to start memorializing what I was viewing. And when I went in and saw him, I couldn't even talk to him. He was all over the place. He didn't make sense. He was also very aggressive, well, violent. So I didn't know what specific mental illness he was experiencing, but I knew that I needed to get an expert in there as soon as possible to see what I was seeing, which is that basically right after his arrest, he's still experiencing this reality that doesn't exist. He's experiencing phenomenons. He's experiencing visions. He's experiencing this alternate reality that is just not true. And that was so important for the case to frame that, because here in California, mental illness is and can be in some respects, with some charges, it can be an absolute defense. Obviously, in the case of murder or homicide, it just brings the level of the aggravation down to a different, a less culpable state, which means that it's less of a punishment. So it's so important, as I'm sure you all know and have experienced, is to memorialize your client's mental state as soon as possible to the time of the incident. And I try and bring an investigator or another witness, because of course we cannot be witnesses at a jury trial or at a court trial. So you want someone else to kind of back that up, whatever you're seeing. So in contrast to what we know is a not competent client or defendant, a competent defendant is able to have a rational and factual understanding of the charges against them. They know what they're being charged at. They know that there's a court, that there are witnesses, that there's a judge. They know the role of the judge. They have a factual understanding of the nature and the purpose of the process or the proceedings, which again is knowing, okay, I'm the one who's charged with something. This is my attorney. My attorney is here to represent me. My attorney is here to assist me through this process. A competent defendant is also able to comprehend his or her own status and condition reference to the proceedings. And most importantly, and I think this is where the mental illness component comes in, to assist his or her attorney in conducting a defense. One of the biggest challenges for us defense attorneys when our clients are mentally ill is they just can't assist us in a way that a mentally healthy, sound person can. And so it's so important for us to try and get creative and try and find other non-traditional ways to really get the information out. And a lot of that is, from my experience, has been building trust with a client. So beginning the relationship, not by just coming in directly and talking about, okay, this is what you're charged with, this is how it goes. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? What was the name of your mother and your father? oh, you didn't have a father? What happened to your father? Oh, he left us, whatever. It starts to give me a mental picture of my client and his oftentimes emotional trauma that becomes important in the grand universe of defending him. If I can show the humanity of my client to the court, the determination, the sentence, the judgment might be different, but I feel like that is important for me as an attorney to do. It's an additional challenge when an interpreter is involved, because sometimes I don't know the use of the terminology that the interpreter is using, and there are so many nuances with interpretation. So what I'll do is sometimes I will ask the same question, but in a different way to make sure that I'm on the same page as the interpreter, so that I can ensure that the question that I'm asked is getting the information out of the client that I need. I'm going to have to go a little faster here because I guess I'm running out of time. A couple of tips that I have found in my practice is that an uncooperative client does not necessarily mean they're mentally ill. Sometimes people are just mean and are frustrated or feeling in a bad mood. So trying to suss out the mental illness and the uncooperativeness is important, and that seems to shake out just in continuing the conversation and seeing how it's going. I think there's a special challenge, or it's exceptionally challenging if an interpreter is used, because the word choice is really important sometimes, the nuance of the words you're choosing to communicate with your client to elicit information. And the word you might be using in your language might be completely different in the interpretation. And so in these situations, if the interpreter comes back to me and says something that seems a little off or inconsistent with my question, I will either talk to the interpreter and kind of figure out what the word that they used in English, or I will re-ask the question using another specific word. Another tip is that when you have a mentally ill client, I like to wait for the effect of the drugs to pass, because often you're going to get a different person in 3 days or so when things have kind of exited their system and they're more lucid and more coherent and more able to assist me in their defense. And the alternative, sometimes you'll get a client who's mentally ill, and they come in off the streets and they haven't been able to get their medication, so they're completely in delusions and experiencing the height of the mental illness. If that's the case, then I'll do the opposite. I will wait for the jail medical staff to medicate them a little bit more, so that I can actually have a rational conversation with them. But I will note not only in my file what I saw, the affect of my client, and I will try and get an investigator or another witness in to memorialize memorialize the mental state of my client when they first were arrested. Investigate. One of my rules for myself is always investigate. Sorry, I apologize for that. Investigate your claims, your client's claim if possible. The irrational, I can't see my, basically, sometimes you might be surprised. Even if your client is saying something that sounds totally irrational. I mean, facts are stranger than fiction. There are a lot of movies made out of crazy situations, and you're like, that would never happen, but it has. I always make notes of that and might circle back later on to confirm that that was what whatever thought or issue that they were bringing up was what I heard. Gathering as much information as possible is always so important. I look at the police reports, I look at criminal history, really heavy on the witness statements to lead me to figure out if there is a mental health defense here. In addition to my clients' kind of affect and communication with me. And then I get medical records, see if there's been any physical trauma to the brain, as well as have they had any mental issues in the past? Have they been treated by doctors? By whom? What kind of medications? All of this to use in the defense. And then finally, collateral information from family members. They're the ones who have lived with this person. They are a wealth of knowledge. Sometimes they're not always forthcoming. Maybe they want to, they're ashamed of their relative or what have you, but building a relationship with a family, if I can, so that I can get the information I need to effectively represent my client is very important. Here's my life interview. This is what I do. I go through this complete kind of from when you were born to the current offense. Let's talk about everything, because you never know when something's going to be very helpful or trigger a defense. So you see developmental history, educational history, employment history, medical history, substance abuse history, psychiatric history, and legal history. I think psychiatric history is important not only for the obvious of the mental illness, but also for the medications that they've been given. So if I need to get my client to stay still at a trial or comprehend things better, knowing the medication that they have used in the past that helps this, I can try and get the jail to get them, my client, the proper medication to assist. Oh, so wrapping up here, the pros and cons of getting a mental evaluation. I think the main pros that I see is that it may give you a legal defense. It will help you better communicate with the client, because I think clients then feel heard, understood. They feel like someone's interested in them, that they're spending the time enough to engage and get all this information. And if you're getting a life history, you're getting a lot of information. And so you get to know the client, and the client gets to know a little bit about you and your empathy and your interest and investment in the relationship you have with your client. You start to, I think another pro is of getting a mental evaluation is you understand what treatment the client needs. And it can assist you in mitigation. Some of the cons may be that you have to turn over unfavorable information to the prosecutor, such as attributes that could be associated with negative psychological issues, like attributes of a psychopath or a sociopath, neither which are able to be treated with medication. Some of the cons are that the behavior of your client that conflicts with social norms. Some people, judges, witnesses might have an adverse effect to that. Disregarding or violating the rights of others, an inability to distinguish between right and wrong, difficulty with showing remorse or empathy. They have a tendency to lie often, the tendency to manipulate and hurting others, and recurring problems with the law. So the cons are basically all information that could come out about your client that shows that he or she is really is just difficult, doesn't have any remorse, doesn't have any empathy, and is not going to change fundamentally. That would be the biggest con, is that you just have this person who is going to be a career criminal, and nothing you do is going to help that person. All right, I think I'm over time already. I wanted to close by saying mental health assessment, a valuable resource of liability. As you know, I just said, I think it's a valuable resource. And I encourage all lawyers to delve into their client's mental history to help them in any defense.